Let's live with my parents starting from today. They're my parents, so you won't mind, right? My husband suddenly said this. I was shocked, holding back tears. I stood in front of him. It's only been a few days since my father's funeral. This was just a few days after my father, who had battled illness, passed away. The chaos of the funeral was still fresh. Ignoring my feelings, my husband packed his things and left. His destination was the villa that I had just inherited, which my father cherished. Shockingly, his parents were waiting there, and they decided to stay at the villa. My name is Natalie. I just turned 33 and have just started out as an independent designer. I married Alex, and we have been living together in an apartment we signed for 3 years now. Perhaps I'm quite well known in my field as a designer. I have a good income, so the apartment is under my name, not my husband's. I lost my mother when I was in college, and within this past year, my father was diagnosed with malignant tumor, in other words, cancer. He was undergoing treatment, but it seemed like his time was near, and even the primary doctor suggested preparing for the worst. Although I lived away from home when I lost my mother, after joining a design firm, my father always kept in touch and maintained our relationship. The news of my dear father's illness hit me hard. As his condition worsened, I had sleepless nights. How's your father doing? The doctor said what? Is it that bad? Should I, as his son-in-law, visit him? My husband would frequently ask about my father's health. But his tone seemed less about concern and more like he was anticipating my father's death. He always seemed discontented because he earned less than me. I wished he would be proud of my career achievements and support me. However, his behavior was like a competitive child. My father said he wants us to cherish our time together and not worry about him. But your father will be gone soon, right? So we should spend more time with him now, so we won't regret it later. I couldn't help but increasingly feel disgusted towards my husband. Initially in our marriage, he was loving, and our time together was always pleasant. But his insensitivity towards my father's illness was agonizing. I couldn't accept the change in him. He works from home. I also planned to work from home after becoming independent, but he said he couldn't concentrate, so I had to rent a separate office, requiring me to commute. It was convenient for visiting my ailing father, but my husband, despite being home most of the time, never helped with chores. I managed my father's hospital visits, made necessary arrangements, and completed my work tasks. Yet, when I returned home, I would find the mess he made, dirty dishes, and leftover food. He only sought his own comfort and was indifferent to my struggles and stress. I felt an overwhelming sense of loneliness and exhaustion. Eventually, my father passed away. During his lifetime, we had decided to dispose of our family home. So, while traveling from the hospital to the funeral home, I was busy with funeral preparations. However, while Alex was with me, he was either making calls, disappearing, or focusing on himself, not helping at all. Alex, please help me. It's hard for me to handle all of this by myself, especially now. I tried telling him, but he took a call just as he was about to respond, and later, he just laughed it off, saying, "I'm busy with work." Anger and disappointment towards my husband grew inside me. Was it because I lost my father too soon? His words felt even colder. On the funeral day, he was deeply engrossed in conversations with his parents, and every time they returned, they all had smug smiles on their faces. The other attendees looked at us with strange eyes, and I felt increasingly isolated. Still, I managed to complete the funeral and burial smoothly and also wrapped up the inheritance procedures. My husband suddenly proposed. Let's start living with my parents from today. They're my parents, so you shouldn't mind, right? If you do, then maybe we should get a divorce. He said this with a smirk. I was in turmoil, my grief over losing my father momentarily pushed aside as I urgently responded. Live together where? In this apartment? There isn't any room. How would that work? The lack of room was because we turned one room into an office and another into storage for his work materials. While our apartment is family-friendly, my husband had always said, and thus used it lavishly. We're not having kids. And thus used it lavishly. With a grin, my husband said, it's that villa you inherited. I was dumbstruck. Although we had sold the family home, I had kept the villa because it was my father's favorite, and of course, I had inherited it. That place was filled with memories of my father and held a special place in my heart. I intended to maintain it as per his last wishes, but my husband seemed to disregard my feelings entirely. We really shouldn't use that villa. But he wouldn't listen. Incredibly, he said that his parents had already cancelled their apartment lease and finished moving into the villa. They probably communicated about this during my father's funeral, delegating responsibilities for the move. He likely believes the villa, being more spacious than our current place and located in a quiet area, would be a better living space. But that villa is filled with memories of my father. Living there with you all will be difficult. Remember that. Even though I protested, the move for his parents had already begun. When I pointed this out, he couldn't even hide his irritation. You always think only about yourself. Always busy caring for your father, always getting called away. Do you even know how much I had to tolerate your daddy issues? I was stunned by the raw feelings he revealed. Now that he's finally dead, it's your turn to listen to me. He took an entire year, the old geezer. He continued to spew cold, harsh words. I was overwhelmed. I didn't want to believe this was who my husband truly was. But he definitely mocked both my father and me. I remembered my father's frail form curled up in the small hospital bed, fighting his illness. He had fought death to not leave his only daughter behind. Though I was left behind, would my father have wanted me to be at the mercy of my husband's whims? In that instant, I realized my love for my husband had vanished completely. At a time when I should have been mourning my father's death, my husband showed not a hint of emotion but rather seemed to revel in it. A tightness gripped my chest, making it hard to breathe. Nevertheless, I suppressed my feelings and repeatedly warned my husband. It's fine to live in the villa, but you'll regret it. Laughing, Alex replied. I won't. If he was going to be that adamant, then I'd accept his resolve. I packed only a day's worth of essentials and left the house. Seeing the minimal amount of stuff I'd packed, Alex looked suspicious. I simply responded, I'll be back to tidy up later. Truthfully, I didn't want to speak another word to him. I had no desire to see the faces of his parents, probably elated over my father's death and the subsequent move. Yet, I silently followed behind Alex. I couldn't bear the thought of them treating the cherished place my father left me any way they pleased. Though it's called a villa, it's just a house in a coastal residential area. The neighborhood is filled with everyday people leading their lives. However, its close proximity to downtown and its location make the land quite valuable. Exiting the train station, the scenery, unchanged from my childhood, continued. I remembered how, when I was a child and would fall asleep during train rides, my father would often carry me on his back. When we arrived at the villa, my husband's parents were already inside. I felt suspicious, and it seemed that my husband had taken a key without my knowledge and made duplicates. This realization deepened my unease. The fact they had been surreptitiously planning to move into the villa without telling me. I couldn't feel any trust in them at all. When his parents looked around the villa, their eyes sparkled with delight. It was a single-family home, but it was filled with furnishings that my father loved. Some slightly different, Western-styled furniture probably reflected my mother's tastes. Wow, this villa is fantastic. No more living in that cramped apartment. Living here, we're so blessed, exclaimed his mother. The view from the second floor is wonderful. Your sneaky dad, hiding such a great house. He should have shared it, we're family after all, laughed his father. Their voices of joy grated on my nerves. They seemed to take my father's death too lightly. They saw the villa, an inheritance, merely as a luxury and beautiful stroke of luck. Indeed, this place is the best. We really should be grateful to your father-in-law, "Thanks for leaving this villa for us," said my husband, joining in on their tactless remarks and laughing. Then, claiming it to be a moving-in celebration, the three of them began opening beers. Preparing some snacks, I let out a deep sigh. The memories of the three of us at that dining table were slowly being tarnished. I spent that night with my emotions guarded. Early the next morning, I was jolted awake by his mother's shrill scream. "It has begun." I woke up to see my husband and his father frantically running to the source of the scream, and I followed shortly after. In the bathroom, his mother lay on the floor, clutching her foot, her face contorted in shock. "The floor suddenly gave way." Her face mixed fear and astonishment, and her panting echoed throughout. "It didn't give way. Maybe you just slipped?" My husband and his father inspected the spot she was pointing at, looking perplexed. However, the floor was gleaming and perfectly intact. Still, she kept insisting that the floor had given way. After watching them suspiciously examine the floor, I finally spoke. "Did you step on that part of the floor with a slightly different color?" The three of them looked at the spot in amazement. Pushing through the crowd, I stepped on the part with a different shade. "Ah!" my husband exclaimed in surprise. When I stepped on it, the floorboard made a crisp sound and sank a little. But when I took my foot off, it rose back to its original position. If you weren't aware and stepped on it, it would surely feel like the floor gave way. "See, the floor sinks a bit. It's like a trap." "What kind of contraption is this? Is this a defective house?" Explaining calmly, I faced their pressing questions. "It's not defective. My father had the house made this way." "What?" "It's a trap house. Actually, my father was a hardcore ninja enthusiast. This villa, a culmination of his time and money, was his masterpiece and treasure. The times he brought me here during my childhood were so that he could adjust or add new traps during the summer or Christmas holidays. So, there are traps like the bathroom's pitfall spread all around the house. Shelves you shouldn't touch, floorboards you shouldn't step on, doors that won't open without a specific sequence, hidden doors, hidden rooms. It was a secret villa filled with my father's dreams. Naturally, it's not really suitable for everyday living. I've been visiting since I was a child and have instructions for all the traps from my father, but my husband and his family might not fare as well. I did tell you it's best not to live here, and it's a place filled with my father's memories. Everyone in the family knows how obsessed my father was with ninjas. In fact, it's more surprising that after being married for so many years, you didn't know." My husband, insisting he hadn't heard about the traps, was left speechless by my retort. His parents, of course, claimed they were hearing about it for the first time. They raged at my husband, blaming him for canceling their apartment lease, rendering them homeless. As the commotion continued, my father-in-law and husband got caught in another trap and tumbled over. The sight of the two sprawled out on the floor brought a brief smile to my face. But immediately, I composed myself and said, "Please, make yourself at home." They had been blinded by the villa's luxury, assuming it was a comfortable residence. They had ignored my warnings and failed to acknowledge the evident hobby of my father. Now, they faced the consequences. Even when made aware of the potential dangers, they responded dismissively. "It's fine. What's the big deal? It's not a problem." Hearing that, I responded with a confident smile. "Well, I have to prepare for my move, so I'll be returning to the apartment for a while." And I left the villa. But of course, I wasn't really preparing for a move. I took a few days off to sort out my father's belongings. As expected, just 2 days later, my husband and his parents couldn't handle the life full of traps in the villa. It was a short time, but I felt positive as I reflected and started making plans for a new life. Now, about my father's villa, after I moved out, it apparently gained quite a reputation as a tourist spot. It became known as the Mystery Mechanism Mansion, often featured in the local newsletters. Whenever the villa was occupied, like during my father's time, visitors would come from all over to see it. I do recall in my memories unfamiliar faces touring the villa, local children playing, and my father proudly showing off his prized mansion to many people. I believe my father had listed both the villa and our ancestral home's phone numbers in those newsletters. And now, the ancestral home's number no longer works. If there are inquiries, they would be directed at the villa. While I had honed my Chinese skills enough to handle calls from foreign guests, it seemed my husband and his parents hadn't. On top of being constantly on edge because of the mansion's many traps and handling visitors, and phone calls in foreign languages, they returned to the apartment looking utterly drained. How about we all live in this apartment? The one to broach the subject was my mother-in-law. Desperately wanting my father's villa, they gave it up in just 2 days. Instead of tea, I handed my husband the business card of a divorce lawyer. We can't live together anymore, so please leave. Taking a deep sigh, I tried to explain patiently. Firstly, I couldn't stand his hasty decision to move in with his parents without any consideration. He never once discussed it with me nor sought my understanding. To begin with, I was handling all the household chores, and he never once cooperated. While the household matters became solely my responsibility, causing immense stress, he never showed any signs of considering my feelings. He completely disregarded my feelings, acting selfishly, even to the extent of moving in with his parents. There's no way I could continue living with someone like that. Didn't you love me? When my husband uttered such nonsense, I couldn't help but snort in amusement. How can I love someone who hoped for my father's early death and rejoiced when he passed away? I kicked the 3 of them out.
This is my house. You should be the one to leave.
My husband yelled, but I calmly retorted. Do you want to be reported for trespassing, or will you leave quietly? Did you forget that this apartment is in my name? At my words, they went silent. They had neither a house nor savings, and they were economically reliant. But before they could sweet-talk me, I was determined to evict them. Neither my husband nor my in-laws had much saved up. Having been evicted from the apartment and unable to return to the villa, they apparently now lived together in a small, run-down apartment. This place is even smaller than the apartment we had before the villa. My in-laws complained constantly. My husband apologized at first, but gradually started to resent them. They, being elderly, seldom work and quit after just a few days when they do. Their savings and pensions are dwindling due to their continuous moving. They constantly complain about each other and argue daily. Considering their current living situation, where neighbors complain about noise and they retaliate with annoyances, it seems they'll need to find a new place soon. My ex-husband once comfortably worked from home in the apartment, but now, in their new place, there's no luxury of a dedicated workspace. His reputation plummeted, and sales dropped significantly. Now, he barely makes ends meet with late-night convenience store shifts. Juggling multiple part-time jobs seems more feasible now. It seems my in-laws believe their biggest mistake was getting roped into my husband's sweet talk. Every time they argue, they blame him for the issues with the trap-filled mansion. Alex would just turn beet red and shout in frustration.
You should have researched that house more. At least this wouldn't have happened. It's not my fault. That woman kept it a secret. Don't talk back. If you had a proper relationship with her father, this could have been avoided. How did we end up in this mess because of our son?
But let's not forget that they were the ones overjoyed at inheriting that mansion. I'll never forget that. After our divorce, I had a turning point in my career as a designer. Taking inspiration from my father's passing and recent events, I incorporated ninja designs and shared them on social media. Before I knew it, I became quite popular, and one day, a major cosmetic company reached out. They wanted a package design with an Asian flair featuring ninja elements. I instantly thought of my father. Of course, I eagerly joined the project, and after putting my heart and soul into it, it turned out to be a great success. My career became even more stable, and I had happy news to share at my parents' graves. The trap-filled mansion still stands. It's a place filled with special memories of my father and our family, so I've decided not to sell it. I've planned a proper visiting schedule. And with some tweaks, realized I can offer free access to tourists and local kids. Luckily, media interviews started pouring in. My dad's trap-filled mansion became a major selling point, and when I said I wanted to use the funds for maintenance, some media outlets were willing to pay a hefty price. Soon, articles about the mansion were translated into French online, dubbing it a wonderful ninja legacy. Donations started pouring in from abroad. The donor was an elderly ninja enthusiast, just like my dad. I'm thankful for the donations, but it seems I'll be busy managing the mansion for a while. Meanwhile, at the mansion, kids' eyes sparkle every day.
Wow, is this the legendary trap mansion? Are there real traps? Which ones? Show me.
Local volunteers help ensure the kids play safely. Beside them, tourists are amazed at the secret doors that open when floorboards are pressed.
Wow, this is amazing. We're so lucky to see such a special place. What other tricks are there here?
Even though my dad has passed away and I ended up divorcing because of the issues surrounding his legacy, I believe I've gained more than I've lost. The mansion has transformed into a new place where strangers can enjoy themselves and share memories of my dad. I've been reborn, looking forward to the future.